very urgent. Your soulmate needs to explain what happened this afternoon. My beloved child, pause for just one heartbeat, because what unfolded this afternoon was never meant to remain hidden forever. There is a quiet urgency surrounding this moment, one that cannot be measured by clocks or explained by ordinary words. Somewhere, while the world continued with its usual rhythm, a single decision created a ripple that is still moving toward you. And now, someone connected to your future feels an undeniable need to explain what truly happened. Stay with this story for a little longer, because the smallest detail may become the biggest revelation before this journey ends. Imagine an afternoon that looked completely ordinary from the outside. People smiled. Cars passed by. Conversations came and went without anyone noticing that something extraordinary had just shifted beneath the surface. Yet for one person, everything suddenly felt different. They paused in the middle of a simple moment, not because they were afraid, but because a realization arrived that could no longer be ignored. It was as if a missing piece of a puzzle had quietly fallen into place. That person is the one this story calls your soulmate. Not because destiny forces two people together overnight, but because certain connections continue to grow stronger even when distance, silence, or unanswered questions stand between them. This afternoon, something happened that challenged every assumption they had been holding on to. They began replaying conversations they once dismissed. They remembered expressions they had forgotten. They noticed patterns they had never understood before. And then a single thought echoed inside them. I need to explain everything. Why would someone suddenly feel that way? That is the question worth staying for. Sometimes life doesn't transform through dramatic events. Sometimes it changes because one unexpected truth reaches the right heart at the perfect moment. Today's afternoon carried that kind of quiet power. It wasn't loud enough for the crowd to notice, but it was impossible for the soul to ignore. Have you ever looked back on a single afternoon and realized it quietly redirected your entire future? Most people only recognize those moments after they've already passed. But today, you're being invited to notice one while the story is still unfolding. Picture someone standing still, surrounded by ordinary sounds, yet completely lost inside extraordinary thoughts. They aren't searching for excuses. They aren't creating imaginary stories. They're trying to understand why today's events suddenly connected pieces they never believed belonged together. The answers didn't appear all at once. First came curiosity. Then came reflection. Then came certainty. Every passing minute made one feeling impossible to silence, the feeling that an important explanation could no longer wait. This wasn't about correcting the past. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about finally bringing clarity where confusion had lived for far too long. Now here's the surprising part. What happened this afternoon wasn't only meaningful because of the event itself. It mattered because of what it awakened. Sometimes the greatest turning points don't arrive carrying obvious signs. They arrive disguised as ordinary conversations, familiar places, routine decisions, until suddenly everything is seen through completely different eyes. That's exactly why this story matters. Because while everyone else continued with their schedules, someone quietly realized they had misunderstood something incredibly important. And once that realization appeared, there was no returning to the version of themselves that existed only hours earlier. You may wonder, what could possibly change that quickly? The answer isn't found in dramatic headlines. It's found in awareness. Awareness has a remarkable way of arriving without permission. It enters gently, yet once it appears, it changes every memory connected to it. Moments that once felt insignificant suddenly reveal hidden meaning. Words spoken months ago begin making perfect sense. Small gestures become impossible to forget. This afternoon became one of those rare moments. Not because fate shouted. Because truth whispered. And sometimes whispers travel farther than thunder. Before this chapter closes, hold on to one thought. There are moments when explanations become more valuable than assumptions. When understanding becomes stronger than uncertainty. When patience reveals what rushing could never discover. Today may have looked like every other afternoon. But for one heart, it became the beginning of a conversation that could no longer remain unfinished. And what they feel compelled to explain, has only just begun. A strange calm settled in after the afternoon passed, but don't mistake silence for the end of the story. Sometimes the loudest turning points arrive without making a sound. The person this story calls your soulmate walked away from that moment carrying something far heavier than anyone around them could see. It wasn't regret alone. It wasn't excitement alone. It was the realization that one unanswered conversation had become too important to postpone. They tried to convince themselves that tomorrow would be a better time. Then another thought interrupted them. What if waiting changes everything? That single question refused to disappear. It followed them through every ordinary task. Every familiar place suddenly reminded them of something unfinished. Every quiet moment became another opportunity to replay what happened this afternoon from beginning to end. The details kept rearranging themselves until a new picture finally emerged. One they had never considered before. What changed? Not the past. Their understanding of it. There is a remarkable difference between looking at a memory, and truly seeing it for the first time. That's exactly what happened. The words they once overlooked suddenly carried meaning. The silence they misunderstood suddenly felt intentional. Even the smallest gesture began to reveal a story hidden beneath the surface. It was as though invisible pieces had quietly connected while no one was paying attention. Stay with this journey, because the next realization is even more surprising. For the first time in a long while, they stopped asking, "Why did this happen?" and started asking, "What am I supposed to do now?" That shift changed everything. Questions focused on the past rarely move us forward. Questions focused on purpose open entirely new paths. And once that door opened, they understood that explaining this afternoon wasn't about defending themselves. It was about bringing clarity where confusion had quietly grown. Imagine carrying an important message that cannot be rushed, yet cannot remain hidden forever. That's the balance they found themselves living in. Not every explanation is easy to give. Some require courage. Some require timing. Some require becoming a different version of yourself before the words can finally be spoken. This afternoon became that kind of moment. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. A day that seemed ordinary while you were living it, only to realize later it marked the beginning of something much greater. Those moments rarely announce themselves. They simply wait until your perspective catches up with reality. That's why this story continues. Because understanding often arrives in chapters, not all at once. Before we move forward, if this story has sparked a thought or reminded you of a meaningful moment in your own life, feel free to share it in the comments. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories that explore connection, awareness, and unexpected turning points, subscribing helps you continue this journey with us. Now listen closely. There was one final realization waiting just beyond the horizon of this afternoon. It wasn't about coincidence. It wasn't about perfect timing. It was about recognizing that some conversations become inevitable once truth has been seen. No matter how long someone hesitates, clarity has a quiet way of finding its voice. Your soulmate hasn't reached the end of that realization yet. In fact, they are standing at the edge of the very explanation that could reshape everything they thought they understood. And what they discovered next is something neither of you could have predicted. There is one final piece you haven't seen yet, and strangely, it was never hidden by distance. It was hidden by perspective. As evening quietly replaced the afternoon, the thoughts your soulmate had been carrying finally settled into one unmistakable conclusion. They realized that explanations lose their value when they arrive too late, but truth, spoken with sincerity, always has the power to open a new chapter. Take a slow breath and picture this. The world around them continued exactly as it always had. Lights turned on. Conversations carried on. People rushed toward tomorrow without noticing that, somewhere nearby, one person had stopped running from an important realization. They weren't searching for the perfect speech anymore. They were searching for the most honest one. That changed everything. Because honesty has a unique quality. It doesn't need dramatic words. It doesn't need impossible promises. It simply arrives with quiet confidence and allows understanding to replace uncertainty. The events of this afternoon suddenly made complete sense. What once appeared to be a coincidence now looked like preparation. What once felt confusing now seemed surprisingly clear. Every unanswered question had slowly guided them toward one unavoidable decision: the story could not continue without an explanation. Not because someone demanded one. Because their own heart finally refused to remain silent. Now imagine standing at the doorway of an important conversation. You've replayed every possibility. You've imagined every response. You've rewritten every sentence in your mind. Then, unexpectedly, you realize something extraordinary. The conversation isn't meant to change the past. It's meant to reveal how much you've grown since the past happened. That realization brought a calm they hadn't felt before. They stopped worrying about saying the perfect thing. Instead, they focused on saying the truthful thing. And sometimes, that is where the greatest transformations begin. Think about this for a moment. How many opportunities pass by simply because people wait for perfect timing? Yet life often moves forward through imperfect moments filled with genuine intention. This afternoon wasn't perfect. It didn't answer every question. It didn't solve every mystery. But it created something even more valuable. It created readiness. Readiness to speak. Readiness to listen. Readiness to understand. As those thoughts settled deeper, another quiet discovery emerged. The explanation they wanted to share wasn't only about today's events. It was about every small moment that had quietly led to today. The overlooked details. The misunderstood pauses. The unexpected connections. Together, they formed a picture that had been incomplete for far too long. Perhaps that's why certain stories feel so powerful. Not because they promise instant endings, but because they remind us that clarity often arrives one step at a time. And maybe that's exactly what this journey has been inviting you to notice. Not every meaningful change begins with a dramatic announcement. Sometimes it begins with one person deciding they will no longer leave important words unspoken. If this story stayed with you until this moment, let it be a reminder that awareness often arrives quietly, but its impact can last far longer than the moment itself. Every ending carries the possibility of a wiser beginning, and every honest explanation has the potential to build a stronger future than silence ever could. The afternoon has passed. The realization has arrived. And somewhere beyond this moment, a conversation is finally ready to begin. One final thread remains, and this is where everything begins to connect in a way no one could have anticipated. Don't rush past this moment, because what seemed like an ordinary afternoon is about to reveal why it could never have stayed ordinary. The explanation your soulmate has been carrying is no longer just a thought, it has become a decision. Hours have passed since that unexpected moment. Yet instead of fading away, its meaning has only grown stronger. Every quiet minute has given them another chance to reflect, and every reflection has led to the same conclusion: there is something you deserve to understand. Not because the past needs to be rewritten, but because the future deserves complete honesty. Think about how life sometimes works. A single conversation changes the way you remember an entire year. One realization reshapes memories you believed were already complete. That is exactly what happened after this afternoon. The more they replayed the events, the clearer one truth became. What they once believed was coincidence now looked like preparation. What they once dismissed as insignificance suddenly carried unexpected importance. Tiny moments they had ignored began fitting together like pieces of a picture they had never fully seen. Then came the question that refused to leave their mind. What if this afternoon wasn't the ending of a chapter, but the beginning of the one we've been waiting for? That thought stayed with them. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was calm, steady, undeniable. Sometimes the strongest realizations don't arrive with excitement. They arrive with certainty. And certainty has a quiet confidence that is impossible to ignore. For the first time, they stopped trying to predict every possible outcome. Instead, they chose something much more powerful: they chose authenticity. No rehearsed speeches. No complicated explanations. Only the truth as they now understood it. Because genuine understanding never asks us to become someone else. It simply asks us to be honest enough to see clearly. As evening settled in, another realization appeared. The explanation they wanted to give wasn't only about what happened this afternoon. It was about everything that led to that afternoon. Every unexpected delay. Every unanswered question. Every misunderstood silence. Each one had quietly prepared this moment. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. A day that felt completely ordinary until one small detail suddenly made everything else make sense. Those moments remind us that clarity doesn't always arrive when we expect it. It arrives when we're finally ready to recognize it. Before this chapter closes, remember this thought. The most meaningful conversations are rarely the fastest ones. They are the ones shaped by reflection, patience, and a genuine desire to understand rather than assume. Your soulmate has reached that point now. The need to explain has become stronger than the comfort of remaining silent. And as the next chapter begins, one thing is certain. The story is no longer about what happened this afternoon. It's about what happens after the truth is finally shared. The night carried a different kind of silence, not the silence of uncertainty, but the silence that comes just before something important is finally spoken. If you've stayed with this journey until now, don't leave yet. The final pieces are beginning to settle into place, and what comes next is less about coincidence and more about choice. Your soulmate had reached a point where holding everything inside no longer felt possible. Not because someone pressured them. Not because circumstances forced them. But because truth has a quiet way of asking to be expressed. They looked back at the afternoon one last time. Every detail. Every unexpected pause. Every moment that once seemed ordinary. Suddenly, none of it felt random anymore. It was as though the entire day had been preparing them for one simple realization: clarity is a gift that should never arrive too late. Instead of asking, "What if I'm misunderstood?" a different question took its place. What if honesty creates the beginning we've both been waiting for? That single thought changed the direction of everything. Fear slowly gave way to confidence. Confusion gave way to understanding. And hesitation gave way to purpose. The explanation they wanted to share was no longer about defending their actions. It was about opening a door that had quietly remained closed for far too long. Sometimes we imagine that life changes through extraordinary events. Yet often, life changes because someone finally chooses authenticity over silence. That is the real turning point. Not the afternoon itself. Not the passing hours. But the decision that followed. As they imagined this conversation, they realized something surprising. The future isn't built by perfect people. It's built by people willing to learn, to grow, and to speak with sincerity. That understanding brought peace. Not instant answers. Not unrealistic expectations. Just the calm confidence that honest conversations create stronger foundations than assumptions ever can. Maybe that's why this story has felt so personal. Because somewhere inside it is a reminder for all of us. The moments we avoid often contain the lessons we've been searching for. The conversations we postpone sometimes hold the clarity we've needed all along. And the courage to explain can become the first step toward a brighter tomorrow. If this story has encouraged you to believe in honest communication, meaningful growth, and the power of understanding, consider sharing your thoughts below. Your perspective may encourage someone else who's on a similar journey. And if you'd like more stories that explore destiny, awareness, and meaningful human connections, subscribing is a simple way to continue walking this path together. Now, as this chapter comes to a close, remember one final truth. This afternoon was never just about an event. It became the moment someone chose truth over uncertainty, understanding over assumption, and hope over hesitation. Perhaps that is why this story found you today. Because sometimes the greatest message isn't hidden in what happened. It's hidden in the courage to finally explain it. And every meaningful journey begins with one honest conversation. The story could have ended with an explanation, but some journeys reveal their greatest meaning only after the truth has been spoken. If you've remained until this moment, stay for these final reflections, because what happens now is not about proving who was right. It's about discovering what becomes possible when understanding finally replaces uncertainty. By now, your soulmate no longer feels the weight they carried throughout that unforgettable afternoon. Why? Because clarity has a remarkable effect on the human heart. Once truth is embraced, the endless cycle of what if begins to fade. The future starts asking different questions. What can we learn? How do we move forward? What kind of chapter do we choose to write from here? Those questions carry hope. Not because they promise perfection, but because they invite growth. That is the hidden gift of this entire journey. The afternoon was never the destination. It was the invitation. An invitation to see familiar moments through wiser eyes. An invitation to recognize that meaningful connections are strengthened not by flawless circumstances, but by honesty, patience, and mutual understanding. Think back to the beginning of this story. Everything seemed wrapped in mystery. Every detail felt in.